this is kind of a two-part question that I think might kind of open up a number of different thoughts. But the first one is, what do you see today as the challenges or the headwinds to further utilization, access, and investment in sustainable and ESG type investments, or given our conversation, investments that have a greater focus on a holistic or comprehensive view of ESG within their selection process?
Well, I can jump in and start and just reinforce the premise of your question, which is all throughout our investment systems now, whether it's retirement or individual or other institutional settings, we have a number of layers of different gatekeepers and approvers of processes. And in most cases, they are fulfilling exactly the function they're supposed to, which is to be very measured and careful and kind of long-term oriented in their thought processes. However, at the far end of that spectrum, I would say that each individual layer creates its own kind of friction and sometimes its own inertia, if not really managed in a proactive way. And so really, this is one of the greater gaps that we've witnessed, again, across all different investment contexts, between the relevance of the issues, the interest to investors, and then the actual action moving to reconcile the two. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for everyone who is sitting in that decision-making or gatekeeper kind of role to take a really responsible, thoughtful, long-term, but proactive approach to this, because the gap is large enough that I think it opens up. We're always worried about the risks of doing something, but I think the risk of doing nothing is just as great in this arena, and it's something we all need to take very seriously.
Yeah, I would just add, I think historically, maybe some of the sort of roadblocks or difficulties have been around just being able to navigate the space and people not really having good guidance on how to navigate the space, and, really sort of, I don't want to use the word excuse, but using sort of the fact that there is sort of a lack of standard disclosure frameworks or labeling systems, almost using that as a reason to not do this and not include these options or consider these options. So I think that is certainly changing as we've talked about today. And I think if we just take a step back and think about these ESG investing options in the broader context of investing options and assess them in the same way, and use our normal processes, I think we'll get to a better spot. And as these issues that ESG investors are focusing on become increasingly relevant and material and impactful, I don't think that we'll have any other option but to move in to make progress and move in that direction.
And I'll add that I just thought of, as you both were answering that, is historically the lack of a track record. And so I know, like Catherine, from your perspective, you've been managing these strategies for a long time, but as you indicated, the two investments or two products that you highlighted now have a 3-year track record. And so within individual investment accounts or perhaps discretionary management accounts, it's easier to select managers, select strategies without that. But in the ERISA qualified plan space, fiduciary consultants like our firm are looking for a 3 and sometimes even more like a 5-year track record. So as these vehicles and products have that maturation and track record, I think you'll see it to be a much easier conversation for committees to add or adopt these investments in their investment menus. And so with that, the second part is kind of on the flip side. I would love to get your thoughts on what your expectations are for the growth and evolution of this topic of sustainable investing and ESG investing, and what you expect to see over the course of the next 3+ years in the field.
Well, I can jump in there. I think we've highlighted today the really rapid escalation of these thoughtful, integrated approaches across a lot of different investment settings. And I do think that will continue. One question that I get pretty frequently, it's flipped from why would you do this to are you doing enough in a very short period of time. So one question that I get is, hey, I totally buy it. These are relevant issues and everyone should integrate them somehow into their investment process. But once we do that, why do I need you, Catherine? Like, why would I have a separate portfolio that has sustainable in the title if we think that this is a good idea, universally? And so I do think we're already starting to see the next layer of questions emerge that at an investment standpoint have to do with thinking about engagement, long-term stewardship, partnership, the more kind of subtle parts of investment practice that go above and beyond the portfolio itself. And so again, I feel like there's this great poem by Rilke, and it says, "I live my life in widening circles." And when I talk to CEOs, this is exactly what they're navigating. They used to feel like they were responsible and fielding questions just for their own organization, and that bubble kind of keeps growing and growing. I think we're seeing the same thing as investors, which is fantastic. As you get a more and more complete sense of your activity as an investor, that circle should be growing. It's more complicated, but it's ultimately much more rewarding and creates a healthier system in the long term.
Totally. I've been focused on this space for 5 or 6 years now. And even in just the last 12 months, 24 months, the number of conversations that we're having on this space have just increased exponentially. It's been really nice to see the interest and I'd say more genuine interest in the space and sort of more conviction that there is a strong sort of investment framework here that we've described. So I do think, and particularly in the retirement space, we do believe that ESG investing is an area that's going to grow very strongly. And Alex, you made a good point that track records are very important, and now that there are more of these quality, fully integrated approaches with track records that have the strong performance to sort of back them up, we think we will see more adoption. If we look back to 2017 when we launched the Natixis Sustainable Future Funds, our target date funds, there were no other ESG focused target date funds out there. And now that we have over a 4-year track record, we're seeing a lot more interest in that as sort of the one-stop shop product for a retirement plan, potentially a default option. There's now another, I won't mention names, but there's now another ESG focused target date fund family out there. And more of these individual sort of options out there like Catherine is running. So we do see it as a space that's really poised for growth. I think another area we're looking at is sort of around the frameworks and disclosure frameworks. For example, the CFA Institute is working on, what I'd call a voluntary ESG disclosure framework for funds that, could be adopted more broadly. It's the CFA Institute, right? Allowing for hopefully easier comparison across products and against that common framework. But we're also seeing, like the SEC is really focusing on this issue this year, really focusing on how funds are disclosing and marketing their ESG practices, and with the intention to make sure that there's no greenwashing going on, that these funds are accurately describing what is actually going on underneath the hood and what they're trying to achieve. So I think there's a lot of progress that's being made on that front as well. So we're very much poised for strong growth over the next 3 years or so.